So, get rid of the Persians, get rid of, okay, we had Nebuchadnezzar. But we want Google Maps. That's because today we are going to Greece. Google Maps from Elizabeth. Actually, this thing takes us to Cranford, but anyways, out of America. Here we are, Greece. So Greece is going to be something a little bit different than the societies that are linked with the stories in the Bible. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Israel, and so on and so forth. Greeks are, the originators of what we call the secular tradition. Secular. Secular is a Latin word, Roman word, seculum, which means the world. It means a couple of other things, that's what I'm thinking about, but so, secular. These three empires, after the Persian, will follow the empire of the Greeks, right? Greek Empire. So that's coming for us, coming attractions. But, so far, Greeks were not that different, at least they don't start very different from the people of the Middle East. Like those Hittites that we mentioned once and never again, so it might be a time to mention them again because they are in the quiz. Hittites lived here. Mesopotamia, Assyrians, northern Iraq, Babylonians, Akkadians, Egyptians, Israelites. Those are very similar civilizations. Greeks are no different. And therefore, they also had the Bronze Age, which lasted about the same time, from 3000 BC to 1200 BC. It was a civilization very stratified. Stratus means layer, so it was very layered. The rich on the top, the peasants on the bottom, and nothing in the middle. It's often called the palace civilization because that was the way that these societies operated. There was a palace somewhere on a hill where the king lived, and you would bring your taxes, your tribute to the king, and the king would store that in the palace, feed himself, and live off the sweat of your brow. We're talking about, anyways, but what is different about Greece is that Greek land was not as fertile as the lands of Egypt or the lands of the Fertile Crescent. These are the lands of Mesopotamia plus Syria, right? This area here, outside of the desert, it's called the Fertile Crescent. Why? Because it's fertile. It makes a lot of wheat and stuff. Things grow. Greece is not like that. Greece is, in general, the rest of the Mediterranean is awful. The soil is really poor. It's kind of sandy. You don't know what to do with it. You can't really plow, because if you plow too hard, you ruin it. So you just have to scratch the surface with some sort of wooden plow and put things in there and hope that the water doesn't wash it away, and it's a real problem. So all of the Mediterranean societies, in terms of agriculture, are very poor. That's why their diet is so healthy? That's one of the ironies. Because, no, not that everything, like you get into the valleys, for example, here in the north of Greece, there is a river. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't, I don't know. Anyways, it's the river that kind of empties here into the near Thessaloniki. It's called Axios or Vardar River. There are two names. Well, that's sort of like a Mesopotamian setting. Large river, plains of Macedonia. So it's good to mention Macedonia now because Macedonia was a society that we know from the Middle East. But the rest of Greece is high mountains, very little arable land, and basically all centered around this sea, which is called here the Aegean Sea. No, it doesn't get bigger. It will get bigger. The Aegean. So yes, there is this country that is called Greece, but it's not wrong to say that Greece is really a group of islands. Even though, technically speaking, this is not an island, but you're talking about a small valley here that is surrounded by tall mountains, high mountains, and the only exit is to the sea. And you communicate with these people here but through the sea. So it's as if you're living on an island. Then the mountain range kind of goes this way, all the way here to Athens. For example, Athens is surrounded by tall mountains that, not that they are so tall that you can't cross them at all, it's just not worth it. To get from Athens to this city over here, Smyrna, or here, Sparta, you're better off sailing than going overland. And in a sense, it's an island culture, which means that islands in general are poor because islands have limited resources. Each of these valleys that constitute Greece, there is a little river in Athens called Kivisos. But this is not the Nile. This is not Tigris and Euphrates. This is like a river that has flash floods in the spring, and then in the summer it's bone dry and there's nothing. And then it starts flowing again in September, November, and October, thereabout when the rain starts. And so the diet of the Greeks, therefore, as I mentioned, is different and healthier. Why is it healthier? Well, think of it. Think of a cow. Cow eats a lot of grass and then produces a lot of milk, and it needs a lot of land to graze. So if you don't have enough land, you're going to use that to grow wheat. Wheat, olives, and grapes. It's what is called the Mediterranean triad. That's what these people ate, for the most part. But let's get back to the cow. So then, eventually, you kill the cow, you eat the beef. From the milk, you make butter. You cook the steak in butter. You make your potatoes with butter. Well, no potatoes yet, right? The potatoes came from where? Huh? No, America. Right. potatoes came from America, so they didn't have potatoes. But they would have beans, so bean with butter. Bean with butter and steak gives you cholesterol and high blood pressure and things of that sort. Whereas, if you eat a piece of bread in some olive oils, supposedly that's healthier. That's not how the ancient Greeks saw it. They thought of themselves as very poor. And throughout their history, they had to import grain. And they would import grain from the usual places, Egypt. The Egyptians had it, buy it, take it. So they would sail. Greeks are funny, even though they live on the islands, and they use the sea a lot. And it's not just Greek, ancient people in general. You don't sail to Egypt like this directly. Why not?
Can you repeat that again?
If you need to sail from Athens to Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why not sail directly?
I don't know, I feel like there has to be like a stop.
Huh?
Like, I guess like a check mark in a way. Like in the check will follow the, just in case something happens. You know, the weather change or something.
What kind of change?
The weather. Like
Yeah.
While you're sailing, the waves can get bigger or something, or a storm.
Have you been on the sea? Have you been on the sea when you don't see the land anymore? Always. No.
I get what he's trying to say. It seems like, you know how like most people when they make a trade, it's like how do you know that person's gonna keep the word? Do you meet halfway? Is that what you're trying to say? Like a check?
I get what you're saying, but not, I guess like a...
No, I understood something completely different.
Yeah.
What did you say?
Like a checkpoint in a way. Like just in case something happens.
Something happens, yeah.
That's what
Like there is wind and the stormy seas are awful.
or like a stop to it.
And the thing is with the stormy seas, it doesn't stop. And there's nowhere to go. And you are there and then you get hit by, they say the waves are, 20 feet or something. That's on average. But you can get a 40 feet wave, that would drown you. So the Greeks, even though they depended on the sea, they hated the sea. And we know that because out of Greek literature, they say, stay away from the sea. And just try it. Take a ship somewhere when it's, I had an experience, I was up there in Massachusetts, and it just going to the airport. From Salem in Massachusetts to airport in Boston. And I said, I'll take a ship. There is a ship that takes you from Salem to the airport. And the weather was rough. That's it. You think it's adios. Anyways. So, you would always follow the coastline. So you can see the coast, and if something happens, you can find a good anchor somewhere, get on the shore, just in case. So they will, sail all around to get to Egypt. Later on, they found up here in Russia, or what is today Ukraine. So look at these rivers of Ukraine, the Dnieper, and this is Volga, and then other rivers over there. So this is arable land. And that's another place where the Greeks got their wheat from when they were running out of it. Otherwise, the Greek diet is this Mediterranean triad: wheat, olives, grape, and with the addition of, feta cheese. You've heard of feta cheese?
I love feta cheese.
What is it? What is it made of?
I have no idea, it just tastes so good.
Yeah.
Like they come on the Greek salads.
Yes. And that's what we're talking about. Yeah, something green, a few olives, some feta cheese. it's goat cheese. It's not cow cheese. It's not made of cow milk. Now they make it of cow milk, but originally it was goat cheese. That's why it has this flavor. Because goat milk, they say, is stronger than cow milk. I don't know why. It has a different flavor. Right? So it's very flavorful. And why is that important? Because Greeks didn't, in most cases, didn't have enough land to allow cows to graze. The land would be used to grow wheat, the little land they had, and the goats would be, okay, go into the mountains and, you know, climb over there and eat whatever you want. And so the cows make, a cow makes a lot of milk, a bucket of milk, kind of every day. The goat makes a cup of milk. Difference. Mediterranean diet, right? So, we have this Bronze Age civilization. In Greece, they are called the Minoans, which is a civilization centered here on the island of Crete. This island here is called Crete. And they were not popular in antiquity. People in antiquity thought that they were a bunch of liars. It's not I who said that, it's written in the Bible, anyways. Trying to find, you know, where Cretians are liars. That's one of the letters of Paul says the Cretians, anyways, but that's another story. And Mycenaeans. Like this, or anyways. I need to check how it's spelled just to not to give you. All right, Mycenaeans. Almost. From the city of Mycenae. But for us, that's enough. These are the Bronze Age people. Who were, well, we know that the Bronze Age people ended their society around 1200 BC, that we call the catastrophe of 1200. And after that came the Iron Age civilization and the Dorian invasion. The people who lived before the Dorians were actually also Greek, sort of. For a long time, we were not sure that those were the same people. And then their writing was deciphered, found and deciphered. And there is a bit of an argument there. For the most part, people agree they spoke a language that is similar to Greek, but different. So, but, you know, for all practical purposes, we can call them Greeks. It's just that when the Dorians came, they destroyed a lot of this culture before, and a lot of these Mycenaean people actually moved and settled in other places. Very often we say that, you know, those people were the other Greeks, those who were not Dorians. So we call them Ionians. Ionia is the coast of Turkey. Now it's a different country, but in ancient times it was Greece. because I told you that Greece was not really a country, but actually a string of islands and territories around the Aegean Sea, including Crete, Rhodos, and so on and so forth. So the coast of Asia Minor, the coast of Turkey, was called Ionia, but Athenians also called themselves Ionians. Spartans called themselves Dorians. After the catastrophe of 1200, the Greeks fell into what is called as the Dark Age. And it means that we have very little information about that period. And then around 800 BC, to be exact, 776 BC, the Greeks started to count the years of their era. The year 776 BC was the year of the first Olympiad, or the first Olympic Games. And Greeks took it to mean that, you know, that they came out of the Dark Age and started actually, the games were held here. There is a huge temple and stadiums and stuff like that. But that was the beginning of the Greek calendar. The Olympic Games were sort of, modern Olympic Games are a reincarnation, a reenactment, so to speak, of the ancient Olympic Games. And only Greeks were allowed to take part in it. If you don't speak Greek, you could not have taken part in the games. There is also one other thing that kept the Greeks united. I told you where the PowerPoints are. We are moving now into chapter 3. The stuff that we talked about, okay, Greek city-state, Dark Age, geography of Greece, we talked about, Minoan, Mycenaean, ancient Greece, Minoan, anyways. Homer. This is what I want to talk about. Homer. Homer was another concept like the Olympiad that held all the Greeks together. So, in order to be Greek, you had to know Homer. And since Greeks are founders of many things that we still use today, things like politics. Politics come from the Greek word polis, which means city. So how do you run a city? That's politics. You start with the Greeks. Philosophy, various sciences, biology, geometry, Pythagorean, right, theorem, right? Pythagoras was Greek. So, for a long time, up until recently actually, this Greek education was called classical education. And since Greeks also had enormous influence on the Romans, and their cultures practically merged together, you will see when I start talking about gods, they're very, they're always double names, the Greek names and then the Roman names, to make things more confusing. But classical education began with Homer. And as soon as you start reading Homer, you get a different feeling from what you had before. You can read, Epic of Gilgamesh, or, writings of various kings of Mesopotamia, and so on and so forth. And they're mostly boasting. I, King Nebuchadnezzar, went over and destroyed Judea, and I burned this city and that city, and this is, no, this is very different. Greeks are, as I said before, the founders of modern secular culture. And it has to do with Greek attitude towards gods. So, let's try with some stories. The chief god of the Greeks was Zeus. In Rome, he was known as Jupiter. So all the planets are named after Greek, that is Roman gods. Saturn, Venus, Mars, Mercury, they usually have Greek names, like Jupiter is Zeus, Saturn is Kronos, Pluto is Hades, even though Pluto is no longer a planet, demoted. Right? Heard about it? So, Zeus does not create people, human beings, in the way, for example, the Jewish God does. Actually, quite to the contrary, Zeus sort of hates people. He finds them annoying. They talk all the time. They want things. Just leave me alone. The guy who created people created human race was Prometheus. Who's Prometheus? Well, Prometheus was a Titan. What's the difference between a Titan and a god? Very often, and in Greek case is the case, right? Gods come in generations. There is the first generation of gods, there is a second generation of God, there is a third generation of God. As a matter of fact, Zeus is actually a third generation of gods. Why is it so? I would think it's because, I told you before, these gods are originally tribal gods, and when one tribe gets conquered by another tribe, the new god is imposed on a previous god, so that's why you have layers. 1, 2, 3 generation of gods. So Titans, Prometheus, Titan. Prometheus creates human beings out of clay, and he calls goddess Athena, because Athena is kind of a strange goddess. It's a very old goddess, so it kind of spans generation. She belongs with the gods and with the Titans. She's kind of everywhere. And she asked Athena, the goddess Athena, to give human beings reason. And that's a huge theme in Greek culture. Greeks were rational people. That's why they invented philosophy, sciences, and things of that sort. And the main principle of reason is to ask questions. So anyways, when they tell you on TV, listen to the science, that's nonsense. Because science is based on reason. And the point of reason is to ask questions. So it's not about listen to the science. It's about asking questions. That's what science does. Just FYI, it kind of annoys me when I see it on TV. There is all, everybody's talking about, you listen to the science. Well, what science? Science is not something that you are told, this is science, but you ask questions. And then you come to what is through, for sure. But you come there by asking questions. That's a Greek principle, that's the principle of reason. Athena traditionally is, that's why she's such a strange goddess, just because she pops up out of Zeus's head. She's not born like any other, god or man or woman, but she pops up fully armed. Athena was also a war goddess, so she was always armed. So she was born like that. That's Lady Gaga, right? Is it? Born that way, right?
Yeah.
She was born in full armor, with a helmet and so on and so forth. Anyways, other things that Athena did, for example, was that teach the Athenians how to make olive oil. And therefore, her city was city of Athens. Anyways, to get back to Prometheus' story. So Prometheus creates human beings and Zeus hates it. So to punish human being, Zeus then creates women. Greeks are very macho. They're still today, and they were even worse in antiquity. So women are the curse. Anyway, sorry.
Wasn't it that Zeus took away fire from them?
Yes, that's a very interesting story. There are kind of a couple of versions over there. So, I'll give you a little bit more complicated version. In the morning, I told people just a short version to kind of get through it quickly. Zeus requires Prometheus, he said, these people that you created, they have to work for the gods, and they have to offer sacrifices. And that's really what the Near Eastern gods were doing. We've seen this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends up by saying, gods are in heaven, and you are here, and your job is to work and offer sacrifices to God and be good and so on and so forth, and the rest is not in your domain. So that's what Zeus was saying. But Prometheus kind of tricks Zeus. And he sort of asks him a question, what kind of sacrifice we're supposed to offer? And he creates kind of a cowhide covered with, he takes a cowhide, but it covers it with bone and fat, but it looks like a live animal, and then he takes intestines and fills it with good meat. So Zeus comes over and says, which one, this or that? And he looks at the intestines and says, no, that's disgusting. Let's get this one. And in that way, Prometheus tricked Zeus, and that has to do with sacrifices. You offer sacrifices, the bones and the fat. You burn those things, but you eat the meat for yourself. That's what Prometheus did, right? And when Zeus finds out, he's furious, and there are all sorts of punishments. One of the things is what you mentioned about fire, that there are a couple of versions there also, so I'm not sure exactly what to tell you, but Zeus doesn't want to give fire to the people, so they make life very difficult, especially in winter. So Prometheus goes and steals the fires, brings to the people, and just Zeus is mad completely about the whole thing. So he actually punishes Prometheus. And his punishment was to be chained to the rock in the Caucasus. Where is right here? Caucasus of mountains are over here. That as far as the Greeks went. So for the Greeks, this was Caucasus Mountains. This was the end of the world. and he would send his eagle to eat his liver every day. That was his punishment. And since he was God, the liver would grow back again overnight, and the eagle would come back in the morning and start eating the liver again. Until he was saved by the greatest hero of the Greeks, Hercules. Hercules. So why am I going into these details about the Greeks and so on and so forth? Just to give you a feeling that Greek religion is very different. Greek gods are kind of nasty. And the Greeks were aware of it. It was a puzzle for them. So they tried to deal with it, they tried to explain it, this sort of nasty nature of Greek gods. And that's why they came up with philosophy, that's why they came up with what they call the allegorical interpretation, right? You heard of the word allegorical? Allegorical means it says one thing, but it means another. So it's sort of like when I was talking to the book and I said, buy the book. But you have the book free online. Right? So I say one thing, but I actually mean another. Yeah? Make sense? No?
Yeah.
Okay. You get the point, what's allegorical. And this allegorical interpretation of the Greek legend is going to lead to philosophy. Because when you start interpreting religious texts allegorically, allegorical interpretation is when the Greeks kind of started to read the Bible, they applied the same principle to the Bible. And they were wondering, okay, God created the world in 7 days. And the Greek first question was, how long was this day? Was it like a regular day of 24 hours? Or was it a day that lasted, 24,000 years? Oh, that's an interesting idea. That's philosophy. So, Greeks also raised the question of ethics that we had before in the case of the Jews. Right? We had this ethical monotheism of the prophets. Prophets saying, if you do bad things will happen to you. Or as we say shortly, karma is going to get you. But, they didn't use karma because karma is something in India. But anyways, this issue of ethics also concerned the Greeks, especially in these epic poems of the Iliad and Odyssey, which I started talking about and I kind of went on a tangent. So it's time to get back there. Iliad and Odyssey. Every Greek had to know it, and later on, the Romans too, and later on in the Middle Ages, people also learned about Iliad and Odyssey. So what's so great about Iliad and Odyssey? Well, let's start with the Iliad first. It's a tale of the Greek hero Achilles during the Trojan War and how the wrath of Achilles led to disaster. All right. One of the reasons I don't like this book so much is kind of beating around the bush. It doesn't tell you. Huh?
It doesn't tell you that directly.
It doesn't tell you directly. So, to set it up, Iliad comes from Ilion, which is another name for the city of Troy. There was a war called the Trojan War. That was a war between the Greeks on this side of the Aegean that were called the Achaeans, and Greece on that side of the Aegean, they were called the Trojans, right? The plot starts when the son of the king of Troy, called Paris or Alexander, comes with two names, Paris or Alexander, comes down to Achaea, to the Dorian Greece, and finds Helen. Helen is the most beautiful woman that ever existed. There is a story, anyways, about how it all happens. Three goddesses were kind of fighting over who is the fairest, who is the prettiest. Athena, Aphrodite, and is it Artemis or here? I think it's Artemis, right? The goddess of height, hunting. So, in each goddess, and Paris, the son of the king of Troy, was chosen to be the judge. So, he can't win. He's going to choose one and incur the wrath of other two goddesses. It's Hera, I think, Hera, right? Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera, wife of Zeus. So he chooses Aphrodite because Aphrodite bribed him. She told him, "You vote for me, I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world." So, yeah, okay. Thereby starts the Trojan War. Goddesses on one side fight, gods on the other side. So Paris goes to Achaea. They kidnap Helen because she was already married to a guy called Menelaus, and they take her back. And now all the Dorian Greeks, what we call the Dorian Greeks, the Achaeans, Homer calls them Achaeans, they cross the sea and they want to get Helen back. They fight for 10 years, and the war is not going well. And then it has to do this, there are all different sort of episodes that we can't, I would, really recommend that you read it. It's a wonderful read, but it's a careful read. In other words, before you read it, try reading about what it is. Google it, find on Wikipedia a summary of the whole thing, because there are so many people involved in there. It's sort of like a compendium, a summary of all Greek history. Because, the army of the Achaeans is full of people from Thebes and places and so on and so forth, and where are they from, and what do they do? So it gets really confusing. One of the people that goes to Troy was a guy called Odysseus. He's going to be a subject of the next one, right? Iliad and the Odyssey. But for now, we are with the Iliad. And overall, it's a warrior story. But in a way, it's an anti-war story. Because it gives you the horrors of the war. What is at stake at war? So there are horrible descriptions of people dying, people taking revenge on one another for no reasons. A big thing is what the Greeks called hybris. And hybris is, I don't know, we would call it today just being an asshole, rather than my French. But it's more than that. It's just doing things that are not just evil, but nasty. It's sort of
That's Libras?
hubris, right? It's how shall I put it? The moment you do something that is called hubris, the God notice it and say, you are overstepping your bounds and you need to be punished. So you know that there's going to be complications, and that person who committed that hubris is going to get the punishment. Because it's such a grave offense. So, one of the things that Achilles, the greatest hero of the Greeks, is he has this sort of slave girl that he captured. And he has to give her away. There's all sort of politics involved there. And he gets angry. And he doesn't want to fight anymore. And the Greeks start losing. And they're trying to tell him, Achilles, I understand, you're really angry, but people are dying because of you not participating. And he just keeps going, doing that. That's hubris. Because there's going to be consequences. And the consequences ultimately is that yada, 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 there is this and that, eventually Achilles is going to die. So, anyways, that's the Iliad. The Greeks then developed all these stories further. For example, in the Iliad, you have some sort of a dude shows up, and he's just a name. You don't know who that person was. He was some guy who came with the Greeks. Later on, they would invent stories and create theater out of it, what we called drama, or in particular, the Greeks called it tragedy. Because for tragedy, it was tragic, and the word tragedy comes from the Greek word tragos, which means a billy goat. So you would offer a sacrifice, you would kill a goat before the performance, and then you would have performances. So the Greeks would then expand on this Iliad and Odyssey by writing theater, dramas. And therefore, that's another thing that made the Greeks very original. They were the founders of theater. In particular, one of the earliest tragedies that we have is a tragedy by Aeschylus, something like this. Aeschylus. Prometheus Bound. It tells the story of Prometheus that I told you. So anyways, we'll get back to these tragedies a little bit later. For now, we have the Odyssey. Odyssey is an epic journey of Odysseus. In Latin, he was called Ulysses, so very often you will find either Odysseus, which is the Greek spelling, and Ulysses, which is a Latin spelling, whose heroism is tested until he prevails by cunning and patience. Well, anyways, yes, maybe, kind of wishy-washy. Odysseus was one of the people at Troy. His cunningness was that he tricked the Trojans by giving them a gift. Therefore, the expression never trust the Greeks bearing gifts. And the gift was the Trojan horse. So they pretend to leave, they leave a Trojan horse, Trojans get the horse inside, there were people hidden in the horse, they come out, open the city gates, Greeks come in and kill them. That's the work of cunning Ulysses. It wasn't the strength of Achilles that won the battle, it was the cunning of Ulysses. But the god of the sea, Poseidon, or Neptune, is the protector god of Troy. And he hates Ulysses for destroying his city. So therefore, he doesn't allow him to return home to Ithaca. So he takes a journey back, and that journey takes him 20 years to get back to Ithaca. That's why the expression journey to Ithaca means a never-ending journey. If you ever read poetry from the 19th and 18th century, they're going to say, it's a journey to Ithaca, and you're like, what is Ithaca? It's Ulysses trying to get back home. His faithful wife waits for him at home. And she's just about to cave in to the suitors. There are people saying, Penelope, she's the queen of Ithaca. Ulysses is not coming back. Marry me. No, marry me. No, marry me. No. And Ulysses comes in and pretends that he's a beggar. So kind of hides and so forth. So Penelope finally says, well, okay, there is Ulysses' bow and arrows, and whoever manages to shoot with this bow, I'll marry him. So they come over and they'll be, oh, I can't, this is Ulysses was strong. And then Ulysses comes in, pick up his bow, and instead of shooting at the target, he shoots the suitors, and there is the happy ending, right? Well, for the Greeks, it's a happy ending. It's a family reunion. Penelope says, "Oh, good to have you back. Good to be back. What you have been doing for the last 20 years, you don't want to know about it." Right? More or less? Enough? We go home? Right. We go home. That's all, folks. For now, we continue on Tuesday.